All right, so we're diving into Mere Christianity, a book known for making those head-scratching parts of Christian thought, well, surprisingly understandable.
What's interesting about Mere Christianity is that Lewis starts with something we all kind of get that feeling of right and wrong, you know?
Right, like a gut feeling almost.
Exactly. It's like this common ground, and he uses that to spring into this exploration of the Christian faith.
So it's not just for, like, people who already consider themselves Christian.
Not at all. It's for anyone, really. Skeptical, curious, already a believer, but wanting to dig deeper. He's talking to you.
I like that, starting with something everyone can relate to. So how does he go from there, that shared feeling, to, like, the core of Christian belief?
He breaks it down into 4 parts. First, he really digs into this idea of a universal moral law. It's like he's saying it's not just, well, this is my personal preference, but something more objective, a standard we all sense.
And that's where, I'm guessing, God comes in as the, I don't know, author of this moral law.
You got it. He's arguing that this inherent sense of right and wrong, it points to a source outside of ourselves, the source of that objective morality. For Lewis, that source is God.
That's pretty thought-provoking, actually, because if everyone feels this moral pull, does that say something about us? Like we're, I don't know, hardwired for this connection to something bigger?
That's a question Lewis tackles head on. And it's in the second part of the book that he dives into how Christians see God. He contrasts it with other beliefs like pantheism, where God is everything, or dualism, where you have these two equal opposing forces. Lewis lays out what makes the Christian view different.
So what makes it stand out? How is his explanation of God in Mere Christianity different?
He presents a God who is both good and just, but also allows for free will. Think of it like this. God created a world where we have the choice to love him or not, to follow or not. And this leads into his whole discussion of the Great Rebellion, the idea that evil entered the world through a choice made by Satan, and now we have this cosmic battle between good and evil.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Sounds like Lewis isn't shying away from the tough stuff, even when it comes to things like evil existing in a world with a God who's supposed to be good.
Absolutely. And that's part of why this book is still so relevant. He faces those tough questions head on. But he doesn't just stay up in the clouds, you know. He brings it down to earth in the third part by looking at how Christian beliefs actually play out in everyday life.
That's what I find really interesting, the practical application. So he's not just talking about Christianity, he's talking about actually living it.
You got it. He gets into virtues, how we should be treating each other, how to navigate those tough choices. It's about aligning your life, your actions, with this moral law he talked about earlier.
It's like syncing up your actions with that moral code. And, you know, that feels so relevant right now, especially with all these ethical conversations happening everywhere you look.
It totally resonates with those discussions. But it's not about blindly following rules. Lewis is big on developing character, on those virtues like prudence, temperance, justice, fortitude, you know. It's about the why behind the what.
So it's not just going through the motions, it's about internalizing those virtues, letting them actually shape your choices.
Nailed it. Internalize, absolutely. Letting them mold your decisions, not just like checking boxes.
Okay, so I have to ask about one of those Christian concepts that a lot of people find, well, pretty hard to grasp with the Trinity. It's a head-scratcher for sure. How does Lewis tackle that one?
You're telling me. But even with something this complex, he makes it surprisingly understandable. In the last part of the book, he tackles that idea of God existing as 3 persons, but one being, you know.
So how does he even begin to explain something so, I don't know, abstract?
He leans on analogies and metaphors, something he does really well throughout the book. For example, he uses a cube. A cube has 3 dimensions, but it's still one cube, right? It's about helping us grasp this idea of a God who is both knowable, but also, in some ways, beyond our typical understanding.
I see. He doesn't try to dumb it down, but he finds ways to make it, well, less intimidating.
Exactly. That's his strength, finding that balance. He doesn't oversimplify, but he makes it clear, even for people who aren't theologians. And that's where his own journey, going from atheism to Christianity, is so powerful.
Right. He's not just talking about this stuff from some detached point of view. He's wrestled with these questions himself, you can tell.
Exactly. And for anyone listening who might be struggling with their own faith, or maybe they're searching for some kind of spiritual footing, Lewis's honesty, it's really validating. It really connects with you, you know? That personal touch makes his words hit differently. Like, he doesn't have all the answers figured out, but he's willing to be real about the tough stuff, and that makes his work really stick with you.
It's refreshing, honestly. It reminds you that asking questions, even the hard ones, it's part of the journey, not something to shy away from. We touched on Lewis's clarity earlier. How about we dive into that a little more? It's a major strength of his, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. One of his biggest strengths is making those big theological ideas understandable, even for everyday people. He uses clear language, paints vivid pictures with his words, and his analogies are spot on. And the best part is, he never talks down to you. It's like he's inviting you to explore these deep concepts with him.
That's something I noticed too while reading Mere Christianity. He takes these huge ideas like sin, redemption, grace, and somehow makes them feel incredibly personal. You start to see them less as doctrines and more as principles that can actually change your life.
Exactly. He connects those theological dots to how we actually live. Like his take on love, for instance. We've all heard about love, right? But Lewis, he goes deeper. He argues that real love, it's not just a feeling, it's a choice. It's a commitment to will the good of another person. And that idea, I think, is super relevant today.
Totally. In a world that's all about instant gratification, quick connections, the idea of love as this deliberate choice, it's almost like a radical concept.
Isn't it? It makes you really think about your own relationships. How much am I willing to give? Am I willing to sacrifice? He challenges us to go beyond that what's in it for me attitude and think about a love that puts the other person first, even when it's tough.
It's like he's pushing for a deeper understanding of love, one that goes way beyond just how we feel in the moment. Which reminds me, his discussion on forgiveness is really powerful. He doesn't sugarcoat it, does he?
No way. Lewis's straight up forgiveness is one of the hardest things we're asked to do. And he's clear that it's not about saying what happened was okay, but about choosing to let go of that bitterness, that resentment, the stuff that can just eat away at you.
It's easy to get stuck in that cycle, replaying the hurt, holding on to anger. But Lewis suggests that real freedom comes from letting go.
That's it. He's not saying to be passive in the face of injustice. It's more like recognizing that holding on to that anger, it hurts you more than anyone else.
It makes you think about how divided everything is these days, all the polarization. What Lewis says about forgiveness, about extending grace even when it's hard, it's like a breath of fresh air in all the anger and outrage.
You said it. Lewis isn't offering easy answers, but what he says about forgiveness, it gives us a way to start bridging those divides, approaching disagreement with a bit more empathy. It's tough, for sure, but it feels so necessary right now.
It really makes you wonder, what if we all actually tried to embrace that kind of radical forgiveness? It's a daunting thought, but also incredibly hopeful.
Totally. It's a big ask, for sure. But imagine the potential for healing, for real change, if we could start to let go of the past and actually try to understand each other.
It's about stepping out of that cycle of pain and choosing compassion instead. And this brings us to another big theme in Mere Christianity, finding purpose. It's something a lot of us struggle with, myself included. So what's Lewis's take? How do we find purpose in a world that often feels, meaningless?
That's where his argument about this inherent desire for something more really clicks. He'd say this restlessness we feel, this sense that there has to be more to life than just work and distractions, it's not something to ignore.
So it's like that nagging feeling that something's missing, that we're meant for something bigger than just getting by. Is that like a clue to our spiritual side?
Exactly. Lewis would say that yearning, that's a sign we were made for something bigger than ourselves, something beyond just the material world. And for him, that something bigger, that's God.
It's an interesting way to look at it, especially now when everything's about self-improvement, finding fulfillment from within. Lewis is challenging us to look outward, to find meaning in something bigger than ourselves.
He is. And this is where his talk about those cardinal virtues is so relevant. See, for Lewis, virtues like prudence, temperance, justice, fortitude, they're not just some outdated rules, they're practices that shape us, that help us become the kind of people who can actually experience true joy and fulfillment.
So it's more than just following rules to please someone up there. It's about developing character traits that connect us to something greater.
That's the core of it. Lewis sees these virtues like spiritual muscles, You got to work them out, make them stronger through practice. And as we do that, we become better at reflecting God's love, at living out our true purpose as human beings.
It's pretty powerful when you think about it, the idea that we're not just here to consume, that we have a higher calling, and it's tied to our willingness to grow and contribute to something bigger, makes you really rethink what matters, huh? It's not about some selfish idea of success. It's about, aligning yourself with something bigger, finding real meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually connects back to what we were saying before about Lewis and that universal moral law. He's saying our choices matter, not just for us, but for everyone around us.
It's like that saying, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Finding fulfillment in something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that whole search for purpose, that desire to do something meaningful, Lewis gets that. He says it points to this need for connection, not just with other people, but with something, well, transcendent.
Like we're wired for it, right?
Yeah.
Part of what makes us human.
Right. Lewis would say this longing for something more, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's pointing us toward our purpose, toward meaning.
It's about embracing that spiritual side, even if we don't have it all figured out. Admitting there might be more to life than what we see on the surface.
Yeah. Being open to something bigger, something that gives us context, you know? And that brings us back to the core of mere Christianity, this moral law, this sense of right and wrong that goes beyond just what we prefer individually.
It's like you saying, just look around, look inside yourself. You can't escape this feeling that there's a right way to live, a higher standard.
Exactly. And if you follow that thread, that need for purpose, that sense of what should be, it leads you right back to what he's talking about, God.
It's a powerful concept, and I think it speaks to people even if they wouldn't call themselves religious. Why do you think that is?
I think you're right, because deep down, mere Christianity is about what it means to be human. Facing those big questions, the doubts, and just searching for truth wherever it leads.
And it's a search we're all on together, right?
Right.
Trying to find meaning, purpose, connection, especially in a world that can feel so chaotic.
Absolutely. And Lewis offers his perspective, his answers, but he also wants us to go on that search. He doesn't shy away from the hard stuff, and that's what makes his work so important even now.
He's like, I don't have all the answers, but let's figure this out together. Let's ask the tough questions and see what we find.
Exactly. It makes Mere Christianity a book you can come back to again and again and get something new out of it every time.
It grows with you, makes you think critically. And honestly, in a world full of quick fixes and easy answers, that push to really think deeply, it's so important.
It's a gift, for sure. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from our deep dive today, that we're all invited on this journey of thinking, questioning, searching for truth, but with open hearts, open minds.
Not being afraid of the big questions, but leaning into the mystery, the complexity. And as we do that, we can learn from people like C.S. Lewis, whose words are still sparking conversations, making us think deeper all these years later.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to leave it.
It's been a fascinating journey, and hopefully our listeners will pick up Mere Christianity themselves and see where it takes them. We just scratched the surface, but hopefully we sparked some curiosity, gave everyone some food for thought.
Definitely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If you could ask C.S. Lewis one question about mere Christianity, about faith in our world today, what would it be?
Think on that. Keep those conversations going. That's what Lewis would have wanted.